One of the things that the Iranians want is they want us out of the Gulf. We have tried to encircle Iran. After having encircled the Soviet Union, at least in terms of containment, we seem to think that that was the answer for everything. And so this containment strategy, which was never supposed to be hopelessly militarized, is now the preferred option. We've tried to surround Iran. We're talking about containing China, which is astonishing. If you look at the size of China and its population, its importance. By the way, if you could turn to that chart that I sent earlier today very briefly, there's something that Americans need to understand. Pushing up borrowing costs everywhere except in China. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that China is stable. China is the world's creditor now, not the United States. And China is becoming the global safe haven for wealth, not the United States. Just look at the lines, where they go. What does this mean to the bonds, the treasuries? It means that the yields are rising. They have to rise or you can't attract any investment. That's unsustainable. So quite frankly, I think regardless of what Trump does at this stage, we've seen the end of the petrodollar. That's done. We're going to see probably the yuan petro or the petro basket of currencies or something else, but the petrodollar is finished. That is a huge foundational stone for our prosperity. And Americans need to understand that what we've done is destroy ourselves with this war. Whatever damage we think we've done to Iran, the long-term strategic damage to our country and to the rest of the world is far greater. Iran will survive. Iran will come back. There's no doubt about it. Just as Russia has survived and Russia has come roaring back. China is going to survive and China's roaring back. In fact, China is now the world's largest economy, not the United States. And we've made matters worse because we constantly seem to opt for the threats of military power, because that apparently is the only tool we've got left. Well, we threatened everyone with tariffs. That's backfired badly. I don't see that we benefited from any of that. This president is all about bullying and threats, and it's back to the Roy Cohn School of Business. Number one, deny everything, admit nothing. Number two, threaten everybody, attack all the time. And finally, whatever happens, declare victory, claim that you've got control, that you're in charge, and everything's just fine. When Trump is driven out of office as a result of all of this, and I think it's inevitable at this stage, he's going to be making the same speech on his way out. I'm great. Everything was better under me, and we've been wildly successful. Thanks. No thanks. He's finished.
And I have a little bit more breaking news now. The Pezeshkian, president of Iran, he has made a post on X, and he says, the level of understanding and comprehension of the requesters from Iran regarding their presence in Islamabad is even lower than Trump's level of understanding and comprehension, ... That's all he says. He didn't say we're not going. He didn't say we are going. He just seems to mock those who thinks that there's going to be talks. I mean, that seems to be in line with other things we've heard. So it seems to imply, again, that there won't even be any talk. So there's nothing for Vice President Vance to go over there for. So we seem to be heading in a bad direction. I want to go down a path a little bit more in addition to what you just said there, which was profound and by itself economically should sound all the alarm bells to do as suggested. But there's also the issue of the oil itself. First of all, the last oil tanker that left on February 27th before the war started has now reached its destination. Now the market has to burn through about 400 million barrels of release from very strategic reserves. And once that's through, then you can't have this, even this market manipulation that President Trump has genuinely been amazing at to keep it under or right around $100. That's running out because all of the props are going to come out, and there's a physical dearth of supply that you can't manage, and that is turning into physical. These are in just the last day or two. Some of these today. Popular Airlines reduces Arab flights and cancels others until June 14th. Singapore jet fuels have doubled to an average of around 960 barrels so far in April compared to 182. LA, flights out of LA have been canceled due to high flight. That's just yesterday. So this is going to continue on. And you talked about the fertilizer issue, which then has compounding problems for harvest season. And then that means the food that's going to be over the remainder of the following year into 27. I mean, Doug, these are serious issues that are these problems are compounding by the day.
Well, it's been amateur hour in the White House and amateur hour on the Hill. None of these people have the intellectual or professional depth to do their jobs. That's the simplest explanation for the terrible position we put ourselves in. It's just that now the so-called curtain is being pulled back. The rest of the world recognizes us for what we are. We're not serious. We're not a serious country. And I'm afraid that that's the widespread opinion of us. And for Americans, what they need to understand, this is analogous to living in a house and watching one of your tenants in the house burn the other one half of the house down. And then the fire is put out. And everybody says, well, thank God the fire's out. At least we've got half a house left. And he says, oh, no, wait. I've got matches. I can burn the rest down. And people say, okay, well, if you think you need to, go ahead and do that. And that's what his supporters in the MAGA movement, whatever number are left, that's effectively what they're saying. Oh, I think it's great what he's doing. He needs to get those guys and kill them. And oh my God. And of course, most of these people have never pulled a trigger in their lives and never shot anything, maybe Bambi, if that, but that's all. It's depressing, but that's where we are now. And I wish there was some good news, but I just don't see any. And, the fuel business is going to come home to hit us hard. We're going to have unrest in this country through most of the summer. All the usual suspects that were out there before will be out there again, only this time. I think you're going to see the citizenry that has been asleep and been trusting the words of people in Washington for too long also go out on the street. And I think that's going to be very rough.
Yeah, especially when those manifesting problems start occurring here and shelves are empty, prices for what's there is more than they can afford. Obviously, gasoline will be going up through the roof. That's when I think you're going to start seeing some of that stuff. But let me ask you just kind of on the near term here. I showed you this chart earlier that showed that we have more naval power in the region than we had even at the start of the war. There's more air power. We've been restocking missiles. And let's take a look at this is what happened during the first 40 days. You see these are the attacks by U.S. and Israel against Iran. And so there was a considerable amount, caused lots of damage, at least to anything above ground. And then you look at what the Iranians were able to do in response. And so it's obviously at a much lower rate, but it was sustained all the way through in large part because of the underground facilities, et cetera. And yet that limited stuff. This is what it had on our aircraft alone. All these are losses, either destroyed or damaged, et cetera. So the question is going to be now, if we go in, and President Trump is good on his word on this, and the one thing he has been good on is using military power. If this is true and there is no meeting at all, much less a successful one, then he goes back to the military. What can we expect then out of this additional firepower that's different from what we saw the other side or the first half?
Well, first of all, I'm not in on the discussions and I'm not sitting in the war room and I haven't seen any plans. I don't expect to receive any calls to inform me. So the best that I can tell you is that we will do what we did the last time, only we will do it with greater gusto. we will pick some new targets on the assumption, and that's my assumption, that based upon the intelligence studies of the last round, they're finding some new targets to attack. And you remember that the key to all of these air and missile campaigns is very much the same. Somebody walks in and says, okay, boss, I've been back over these targets. We've gone through them. We put them through AI. We've analyzed them. We're confident now that we've got the right set of targets. In addition to most of the ones we hit before, we've now got these new ones. We think this is the answer. In other words, you put enough rounds out there, eventually you're going to hit something that counts. I don't think that works, and I've seen that happen before. It's back to World War II. You know, we bombed all sorts of things trying to destroy production. German production never slowed down. But what we did succeed in doing, and we never fully appreciated it until nearly the war was over, was destroy the fuel production and distribution system, because that was key to stopping the German army and the German Air Force. That was vital. That did more to help the Soviets and their millions of troops reach Berlin than almost anything else we did. Now, I don't know what they're coming up with now, but I think they're going to have a tough time. As we've said before, Iran is a natural fortress. It's enormous inside. It's much larger than Germany was, much larger than Japan. It's the size, half the size of India. And that means the size of Western Europe. So the notion that you're going to find something now to hit that's going to change the outcome, I think, is unlikely. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with the ground troops. My impression is that President Trump, giving credit for getting something right, even a broken clock is right twice a day, he seems to have objected to the use of ground troops. I don't know who is arguing for the seizure of islands in the Persian Gulf, whether it's Karg or Abu Musa or whatever the things they are looking at. Doesn't make any difference. I think it's a waste of time. I don't think it changes anything. I don't see how putting soldiers or Marines on the ground in these places is going to demonstrate that we control anything. It's not going to wrest control away from Iran. And Iran still has 45 to 50,000, I would say, drones, and probably 15 to 20,000 or more missiles. Those things are precision guided. They're going to get through, and they're going to target wherever we are, whatever we do. So I hope that he sticks with his opposition to the use of ground troops, because I just don't see any payoff for their use in this setting at all. And I think we'll lose a lot unnecessarily. But we don't know what the great men that make these decisions are saying. And remember, President Trump is the sort of man that if he hears something he likes, he leans over right away and says, oh, yeah, I like that, without understanding what he really was told. And so I don't know what Special Operations Command is saying. I don't know what the various service chiefs are saying. I don't know what the CENTCOM commander, Admiral Cooper, is saying. Who knows? And I would be very careful about all these things in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I think some of what they print is probably true. But unless you were in the room and you not only heard what was said, but you could see the people saying these things, you can't really pass judgment. A nation of 93 million people to its knees. We're going to destroy its way of life, its existence. But for us, it's just a journey. Well, why is it just a journey for us? Because it's a journey for Israel. And that's the problem. This is the problem that people don't understand. We cannot solve Israel's strategic problems militarily, which is what we're being asked to do right now. Israel was already widely disliked, if not treated as a pariah in the region anyway. Now, the rest of the Islamic world sees Israel as this menace, this virus that is going to ultimately destroy all of them. And all you have to do is look at the map of Greater Israel. The map of Greater Israel includes much of Saudi Arabia, northern Iraq, Syria, Jordan, the Sinai, and some territory west of the Nile, and of course, at least half of Lebanon. And all of this is part of so-called Greater Israel. Well, we used to have something during World War II called Greater Germany, Großdeutschland. This was the expanded Germany. Ultimately, that actually made more sense than what we're seeing, because at least there were Germans living on the territory, not always in the majority, but there. In this case, we're talking about whole populations that have to be subjected to Gaza treatment. They're going to have to be effectively subjugated, enslaved, or driven out. This is insane. And this is what we are fighting for. People need to understand this. And I don't see any evidence that it could possibly exist. We've always had the objective of gaining control of the oil fields in the region. You've got to go back into the 1990s and go back and read the things that Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz and a host of others in their group of neocons were writing and insisting that if we could control all the oil resources in the Middle East, then we would have China by the throat. Of course, the real intention was not just to have China by the throat, but to make Israel the undisputed champion and king of the Middle East. I don't think we're going to ever get China by the throat, nor do I think we as Americans need to do that. That's absurd. But I think we're back to where we were before. This is all about Israel and securing it and making it safe and putting it in charge of the whole region. All of this is going to fail. It has no chance of success. And this business of bombing a nation into the Stone Age, I must say, I do disagree with one thing you said. You said, well, Dresden, we can't do what we did there. No, I think we can. And I think the Iranians know this. And their cities already show evidence for it. We're doing things that we have not done since the Second World War or Vietnam. And one could argue that our bombings, both we and the Royal Air Force during World War II, committed war crimes. And you can make the argument that we did the same thing in Vietnam. And I think we're going to do the same thing here. Ultimately, you end up destroying power. You put hospitals out of business. The Israelis have been bombing hospitals in Iran and emergency centers ever since the war began. And they launched a number of strikes last night, I think because they worried that they might end up facing a ceasefire. I don't think there's any chance of a ceasefire coming. I think what they're going to end up facing is something worse than they've already encountered from Iran and potentially others that support Iran. He's in this escalatory trap. He doesn't know how to do anything else but bully. So what he's trying to do is bully once again. Remember, we talked about, if it fails, what else do you do? Well, you escalate. You could turn around and say, well, escalation isn't the answer. But there's no one telling him to do that as far as I can tell. And I certainly don't see great evidence for people standing up in the Department of Defense and telling him, sir, this is not going to work. And if you do this, we could end up in a much wider war with a lot of other people. And by the way, we mentioned escalation beyond the borders of the Eastern Hemisphere. In other words, could there be escalation here in the Western Hemisphere against us? And the answer is yes. The drug cartels, which have always been the real threat to us in Mexico, are for hire, and they have an interest in seeing to it that they continue to move drugs and people back and forth across our borders and coastal waters. So could they possibly cooperate with Iran? Absolutely, without question. There are already Hezbollah chapters down in Mexico. They've never taken any action against us, but they exist. The Sunni chapters, the ISIS/Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra crowd, they've been much more active in Mexico. But all of these things could blow up in our faces inside our country. They could destroy our refineries, our oil infrastructure. What about our nuclear power plants? Could they cause accidents there? There are a whole range of things. And we have not done what we need to do to secure our own infrastructure. We started under Obama, and Obama diverted all of the money that was supposed to go into modernization of the power grid and other things into the pockets of his campaign supporters. So we didn't get much out of it. We really do need to pay attention to our own domestic infrastructure, particularly our electrical grid, our power grid. So, yeah, I think that could happen.
So the question is, what are they going to do? And can you just give us a little sense for whether it's Carg Island or something else? I personally think that the Carg Island is just a deception operation. I don't think anybody's actually going to go there because the difficulty would be too high. I don't know. Maybe they will. But whatever. You're talking maybe 5,000 Marines with the 2 MEUs and another few thousand from the 82nd Airborne. What can those organizations, what can that much ground combat power, along with the A-10s and the Apache helicopters, which have been sent over to support whatever they're going to do on the ground, what is feasible militarily for them to do?
It's important for Americans to understand something. What you do as a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine after you arrive is much more important than how fast you get there. Right now, the emphasis on light and fast. Why are we sending a brigade for the 82nd? Well, because we can. You load up 3,000 men. Now, of course, the Army, as always, has said, well, if we're going to send a brigade, we have to have a division headquarters on the ground to manage it. So 3,000 troops need a 2-star general with a 1-star general as deputy and probably 150, 200, maybe more people to plan and conduct operations. This is a sort of standard, World War II nonsense that we go through. And then the Marines. We're going to put Marines there because we can float them in and then we can put them somewhere. Well, the problem is once you put the paratrooper on the ground, once you put the Marine on the ground, the Ranger, whoever it is, what are they going to do? What can they do? Are they going to seize and hold something of great value? What is the seizure about? If they go to an island, can they hold that island? Well, I think we're finding out that islands are extremely vulnerable. Unless it's the size of Borneo, that means that all sorts of precision strike missiles and unmanned systems can annihilate everything on the island. So if you think you're going to go on an island and then hold it for what? What's the benefit? How does it help you? And see, from the Iranian standpoint, they're probably sitting there asking themselves, how could we be this stupid? And we shouldn't get confused. We're not saying that Marines or soldiers or anybody else are not good, solid people that are well-trained and reasonably well-led, I hope, and disciplined. It's not the point. Is what are they going to do when they get there? And how much can you expect of them? So that's why I go back to this thing of, well, we'll seize the islands. Now, if you look at the straits, and this is very hot, very important. I just wrote a piece on Substack that goes into some detail on this. If you go through all the thinking and then you say, well, I'm going to introduce ground troops and I'm going to seize the straits. What does that mean? If you look at the sides of the strait, in other words, the coastline, you're talking about 1,000 feet of cliff. In other words, this is an uphill climb in the worst sense of the word. Are you then going to land troops further to the east and then make the long march around and take it from the landward side? I mean, what are you doing? If you're going to put them on an island, once they're sitting on the island, what kind of control or influence are they going to assert? And the answer is none, because the place will be pulverized. It'll be covered by rockets and missiles. Anything on it will be exterminated. I mean, that's the easy thing to do. What else would you do? Now, of course, if you're going to make the argument that the Iranians are running out of missiles, which reminds me of the Russian army running out of missiles and rockets and so forth, then maybe it's fine. Maybe you could go there and open the chaise lounge chair and take in some sun. But the point is, I don't think so. And I don't think that you can stop from 150 kilometers away all sorts of weapons being launched against those sites. And again, we're back to persistent surveillance. What are you going to do that's going to fool anybody? where are you going to stage forces? Are you going to try and stage them in Kuwait, in Bahrain? Are you going to try and stage out of Oman? I doubt seriously the Omanis will be receptive to that idea. Are you going to try and stage out of the UAE? Anywhere you go where you try to mass forces, it's going to be picked up, it's going to be targeted, and you're going to be brought under effective fire. So the problem with all of this is, do we have these capabilities? Yeah, we got lots of light infantry. Much of it's good. It'll go where you send it. But what are you asking it to do? And I think at the moment we're asking them to do the impossible, to exert control over geography that they can't control. It's not a question of are there not enough of them? It's simply a question of surveillance and strike. And if you don't have that advantage, if you can't rob the enemy of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and you can't defeat his intermediate range or tactical ballistic missiles and so forth, what are you going to do? Perhaps we're going to have to go through this in order to learn this lesson the hard way.
And just real briefly, what about this? Because there's a lot of things swirling around, and a lot of the rumor mills that actually these troops, especially these light fighters, are actually being sent to do a seizure operation to get those 400 kilograms of reprocessed material and prevent Iran from ever turning them into a nuclear bomb. What is the possibility? We have a lot of good people that can do things. We've seen how SEAL Team 6 went and took out bin Laden. We've seen how we just took Maduro out here. Can something like that work?
Well, there's gold Amazon jungles. Why don't you go find it? Good luck. I mean, you're looking for the proverbial needle in the haystack. Now, you can try and detect things using satellite imagery as well as other means of detection overhead to see whether or not you found something that's radioactive. But I'm not sure you're going to end up with what you're looking for. It doesn't take that much material to alert somebody in space or flying overhead. What if you alert on 15, 20 places? Do you line them up and go to them in succession? How do you get there? Are you going to fly in a helicopter? Helicopters are so vulnerable. You can knock them down with rocks. So how do you get in and get out without being detected? And that's the biggest problem I have with all of these assumptions. The other thing is, I read recently, somebody said we may need as many as 200,000 troops. If you go back to the Dardanelles in 1915, it started really in earnest in February of 1915. It lasted for 9 months. They went in initially, these are the straits between Turkey and Europe, what we call the Bosporus. And the idea was that you seize the straits so that you could pass the Royal Navy through. They can then take Constantinople, now Istanbul, under direct fire. You can land more troops and seize the capital and knock the Turks out of the First War. It was very attractive. Everybody thought this was a great idea. Well, not everybody. The chief of naval operations thought it was insane, but Churchill, who was effectively the Secretary of the Navy, overrode him and said, no, this will be successful. Churchill did these kinds of things routinely. If he didn't agree, he just dismissed expert opinion and then would go off on these tangents and do incredibly stupid things. The Dardanelles operation was a good example. And there were something like 20 forts, fortified positions up and down the straits the Turks had built with heavy artillery. Then on top of that, you had over 300,000 Turkish troops that showed up. Beyond that, you had mines of all different types and kinds, mines that sank 3 battleships and numerous other supporting vessels. Ultimately, they ended up with 500,000 men on the Gallipoli Peninsula. 500,000 troops, mostly British, some New Zealanders, some Australians, British Indian Division, which seldom gets mentioned. It deserves credit. They fought well. And some Frenchmen, 500,000 men. It was a disaster because once again, you were going uphill. and the Turks held the high ground. The Turks lost 87,000 men killed. I don't know how many the British and others lost, but it's probably pretty close to that.
48,000, actually. I looked that up the other day.
The Turks won. And how could they lose? It was impossible to defeat them given the terrain and the circumstances. So what I'm trying to get across is, people seem to have read the story of the Dardanelles, but they didn't read the whole way through. They read the first few chapters, said, oh, this is a great idea, let's do it. Didn't bother to read the concluding chapter, which was catastrophic failure. It was a dumb idea. What they're talking about trying to do with ground troops in the Straits of Hormuz, in my judgment, is an equally dumb idea. Unless, of course, and I could be wrong about this, you have annihilated all of the intermediate range and tactical ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. You have eliminated all of the unmanned systems that could be basically launched and hurled at you, so that the place is barren. And then, even more important, perhaps you can jam all the satellites, Chinese and Russian and others, that are providing assistance and support and imagery to the Iranians. If you can do all of those things, then I suppose you can put people on the ground with rifles walking around looking at the neighborhood. Will that give you control of the straits? Well, that depends on whether or not you got all the underwater unmanned vessels and systems, whether you have killed sufficient numbers of speedboats, whether or not, go down the list.
Yeah.
Everybody forgets before we went into Normandy, there was almost no German Air Force left in Western Europe. Everybody forgets this. We wanted to land in 1942. Then we wanted to land in 43. And each time the British wisely distracted us and said, forget it. We have no chance of coming ashore. There's an event called Dieppe. Some of your listeners or in the audience may want to go look this up. In 1942, the Canadians insisted ferociously, we know we can beat the Germans. Let us land. And they landed with a few thousand men, and they were slaughtered. And they brought tanks and everything else, and they were destroyed. And the Germans sank everything. By the time we landed in Normandy in June of 1944, there were only 2 fighters in the German Air Force capable of lifting off and fighting us. In 1943, before this had occurred, there were hundreds of fighters, even thousands left that could have done enormous damage to us, and thousands of top flight troops. But everything was on the Eastern Front. There wasn't much left in the West. And what was there, well, it just wasn't top of the line. We don't even point these things out. We don't understand how things really went down. And by the way, even with all the advantages that we had created, we had 5,000 fighters in the air over Normandy. Even with that, the Germans held us up for over a month. And at one point, it looked like they could drive us into the sea. So we need to understand these kinds of operations are extremely dangerous, very difficult to conduct. And I hope somebody somewhere is telling these things to the president.